Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an Ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 106. There will be an MPE Summit in the fall of 2022. And in the last episode, I gave a save the date, but we're going to need to scratch that date because we found out that 180,000 people will already be descending onto Louisville, Kentucky that weekend for a music event. And we want our NPEs and adoptees to be able to have ease with their travel and hotel arrangements. So that weekend that I previously stated will not work. Scratch September. They are now looking into a weekend in October or November of 2022 for an MPE Summit, and it will be announced at a later date. It is not my summit. It is being organized by Right to Know and another adoptee group. They are thinking it could have 300 to 500 NPEs at it. It's going to be amazing. I'm going whenever they decide to have it. I'm on the development committee. I got super excited a couple days ago as they started talking about the NPE celebrities and musicians that they're trying to reach out to and maybe even have perform for us. I want to be around others that knows what this feels like. I just immediately connect with strangers when they are an NPE. As soon as I find myself at a table with NPEs, within minutes, I'm their friend. I find myself nodding my head and listening and connecting. I'm always like, you know what this feels like. It happened to me too. Whether you are 2 months in or 2 years in, you are totally affected by this sort of DNA shock. And it is a shock. It's traumatic. My healing needs community. When I listen to others that get it, I feel understood. I feel a teensy bit better that day. And then the next day is another bad one. So I read or listen some more. And we are going to listen to an NPE share her story today. We are going to be listening to Julia. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Lily.
Thank you so much for doing this today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really have been looking forward to this.
Oh, I appreciate it so much. And I know you know the format, so we'll just go ahead and get right into your story. Why don't we start at the beginning and you can tell me about your original family?
Okay. So I'm going to give a little background on my parents, my birth certificate father and my mother to begin with. And I'm kind of probably going to go in chronological order, pretty much. So my birth certificate father emigrated to Canada from Hungary in the late 1950s. My mother is from Quebec. She's from a rural area in Quebec, and she moved to Montreal in the late 1950s. So my parents met probably in around 1959. They both lived in the same rooming house and began living together as man and wife in 1960, but they never married. At that time, my mother was 18 and my birth certificate father was 32. I was born in 1964 in Montreal, which was the time frame that they had decided, to wait 3 years before trying to have a child. And 3 years later, they got pregnant with me, and I was born in 1964. I have a younger sister who was born 2 years later in 1966. And my early childhood was good. I mean, my father was very hardworking. My birth certificate father was very hardworking. My mother worked even though she didn't necessarily need to. He supported her, but she worked as a waitress and worked as a school bus driver when we were little. In 1970, when I was 6, we left my father and moved to Florida, which was really traumatic for me because I really loved my father a lot, especially when I was a little girl. We moved to Florida in 1970, and basically I was raised in South Florida, but we did move back to Montreal from 1974 to 1976, and that is when my little brother was born in Montreal. So in Florida, and my parents, my birth certificate father was always in our life. When I was young, even though we were raised in Florida, we would go back to Quebec for the summers. We would stay with my grandparents, my birth certificate father, which I call him my father, but for this podcast, I'm going to refer to him as my birth certificate father.
Mm-hmm.
So we would spend the summers with him, my grandparents, my uncle and his family. They had cousins my age. And that was basically our growing up. And he would come to Florida and spend time with us in Florida. And he was always in our life. My husband is also from the Montreal area. So even after we married, we would visit. We always visited, went back to visit and spend time in the summer with our kids, and saw my father, my husband's family, and my father visited us in Florida and later in Georgia. We moved to Georgia. My husband and I moved to Georgia in the late 1990s, but my sister had moved here in the mid 80s. And my younger brother came after. He came also in the late 90s after we did. So the three of us still live very close to each other, in the same area, and have raised our kids here together. So in 2006, my birth certificate father died of cancer. My husband, my sons, and I took his ashes back to Hungary and buried him with his parents in the village where he was raised.
Mm.
My aunt, his sister, was still living. She was still there. Her son was the mayor of the village where my father grew up. It was just a very touching time. I mean, it was a really nice time. They were so gracious and so wonderful. And it was actually the third time that I had been there in my life. I had been there with my father, with my father. When I was about 3.5, he took me there to meet my grandparents, his parents, and I went back when I was about 12 with my birth certificate father and my sister. And then in 2006, when we went and buried his ashes, I always felt a connection to that place. I mean, I always felt Hungarian. I felt, to me, I did feel a strong connection to that heritage, as well as my French Canadian heritage. But of course, that was also because I spent a lot of time in Quebec. So now we will fast forward to Christmas of 2017. My oldest son got me an Ancestry DNA test for Christmas because he knew how much I loved all that DNA stuff. I like those shows, Finding Your Roots, Who Do You Think You Are, Long Lost Family. I mean, those were my favorite shows. I loved all those stories, and there were always discoveries, and, it was just really interesting to me. So my oldest son, got me a test. My younger son and I had done a family tree on Ancestry years earlier, like just using the records that they have on there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had gone back quite a few generations on my mother's side because her family had been in Quebec for many, many, many generations. My husband's family has also been in Quebec for many generations. And my married name is actually the same as my grandmother's maiden name. So we wanted to see if there was some sort of intersection in the tree somewhere, which there wasn't. So, anyways, that was something that was interesting to me. So I got the test Christmas 2017. I took the test on Super Bowl Sunday in 2018. I don't know when that was, probably February. And I got the results in March of 2018. So when I got those initial results, and I was just like so excited. I was excited. I wasn't really expecting any surprises as far as heritage, but I did have some curiosity about if there was. I mean, I was curious to find out if there was any First Nations, or Native DNA or Jewish DNA, since my father was from Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
There had never been any stories or indication or anything like that there should be any of that. That was just something that I another group of people, two groups of people that I felt really connected to, or I felt some sort of bond with. I just was very curious to see if there was any of that. I also wanted to see if there was any Irish, as we had been told that my mother's grandmother was Irish. So I get the results in March of 2018, and it shows 45% France, 15% England, Scotland, 35% Italy or Greece. So I was like, okay. At that time, I don't know if you may not be familiar with this, but at that time, when those results came out in early 2018, it would say 45% France. But then underneath, it had a lot of countries saying could also include, all these other countries.
Mm-hmm.
15% England or Scotland or whatever. And it had like, a bunch of other countries that could include. So Italy or Greece, it was 35% Italy or Greece, also includes one of the countries that was listed was Hungary. So I was like, okay, I wasn't, to me, it was kind of like, there was no Jewish, no native, but there was the England, Scotland. So I thought, okay, well, there's probably some Irish, and of course, France and Italy or Greece, which could include Hungary. So, and I never even thought to look at the matches. I don't even know why I didn't think to look at the matches, but that was not something that I thought about or looked at. So I happened to talk to my mother on the phone shortly after I got those results. And I said, I was just joking. And I said, oh, I did this DNA test and she lives in Florida. So she is not here locally with us, and I just said to her as a joke, I said, it says Italy or Greece. Is there something, I said, is there something you need to tell me? She goes, well, yeah. She goes, when I got pregnant with you, I worked in an Italian restaurant. And I was like, ah, ha, ha, you're funny,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that she had worked in Italian restaurants and Greek restaurants in Montreal. So I just, I really blew it off. I didn't, and that's all she said. Like she wasn't, and the way she responded was kind of a joke too. She wasn't shocked or, anything like that. So I was like, oh, she's so funny, blah, blah, blah. So, I just kind of put all of that aside. Well, fast forward to October of 2018, I got an email from Ancestry saying, your DNA hasn't changed, but our capabilities or whatever, the results have changed. Do you want to see your new results? So I was like, oh, okay, sure, So I opened the email and it said 50% France, 50% Italy. No, and then at this time it didn't have all the little countries underneath, could include this, could be this, that, or the other. So I was like, okay. And with their updated technology or whatever, they were able to see where the DNA came from. So I had all these, my mother's DNA has been in North America, for probably a long, long time. So there was a lot of DNA in Quebec. And then there was DNA that came from Salerno, Italy to North America. So I'm like, well, this is not Hungary. This is in Italy. It's in southern Italy. It's, and I mean, I was just like, what? I was stunned. I was really stunned. And then, of course, I went back to that little conversation we had back when I first told her about the results. And she said she worked in an Italian restaurant. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that. I guess, I didn't know what to think. And, at that point, if she would have said, yeah, that can't be right, that's not right, I would have taken her word for it and just said, well, the test, they had these vague results to begin with, and it's probably just not very accurate. So, of course, I started thinking about it. So this was in October of 2018, and I've been thinking about it every day since then. All these scenarios went through my head. She was very pretty, young, friendly. I didn't know and I knew that she had worked in Italian restaurants and Greek restaurants. And was wondering if something unfortunate had happened, to her. And that was just one thought. So, I just kind of figured I kind of needed to just talk to her about this a little bit more. So she came for the holidays, for Christmas of 2018. She came here to Georgia because all her children are here. And I was like, well, I need to try to just have some sort of conversation with her about this and see if there's any information. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So before she left in January of 2019, I just kind of, we were sitting at the table, she and I, and I just blurted it. I said, so who's my father? And she said, oh, she gave me a name, a very Italian name with a middle initial. And she said, this was his name. He was my age. We worked together. He was the manager at the restaurant. He was very, very nice. And he was my boyfriend. And I'm like, what? I'm like, okay. And I didn't ask any more. And she didn't, she didn't offer any more information. I told my siblings, and they, my sister was a little upset, I think, and surprised. My brother didn't really comment, but of course my sister said, it doesn't change anything, etc. So that was that. That was January of 2019. She went back to Florida, and I didn't bring it up with her again. I spent all of 2019 wondering about the family. I looked at the DNA matches. I finally looked at the DNA matches, and my closest match was a second cousin with an Italian last name. There were no matches with the last name that my mother had given me, but there were Italian names, French names, English names. It took me several months to figure out to look her up on Facebook. But after a few months, I did do that. I looked her up. I found her very easily on Facebook. She lived in near Montreal and had 7 friends. And so I looked at her friends. One of her friends had the same last name as the last name that my mother had given me, which was a relief to me because at that point I was starting to wonder if, maybe my mother had not given me the right name. So I thought, okay, well, this lady who has 7 friends and who is related to me has a friend with the same last name as my birth father's last name. So, and she was really my only link, So I debated. I debated about contacting her on via Ancestry, and I never got the nerve up to do that. I didn't message her on Facebook and which she didn't seem to be very active on there anyways. But, and of course I did not call that phone number that I had from looking up the name that my mother had given me in the phone book. During that time, 2019, I discovered Dani Shapiro on YouTube, I think. And she, her story was amazing. And I did order her book, and eventually, I read it, but not in 2019. I just thought that she had an amazing story. I also listened to her podcast, Family Secrets, which I enjoyed. So that was 2019, and I was really very curious, and it felt like it was a secret, of course. I couldn't talk about it to anybody. My husband, knew what had happened, knew what I knew, of course, but I didn't discuss it with him or anybody really. It was just kind of part of me felt that, I had a father, I love my father, and I shouldn't be trying to find another father.
Okay.
So that was kind of my feeling at that time. But it just kind of was bigger than me. The desire to know was just bigger than me. And I didn't feel Italian. I didn't feel it didn't, like some of the guests that you've had say, I always felt different. I felt like there was something missing, something different. I never felt that. I didn't, I just didn't feel, anyways. So that was 2019. Had decided, my mother was coming for the holidays, 2019, Christmas 2019. And I decided again, I was like, well, I need to try to have another conversation with her. And to me, it's just easier to do it face to face. Have another conversation with her and see if there's anything else she can remember about him, So when she came on New Year's Eve of 2019, 2020, we had a conversation, and I asked her, I said, do you remember anything else about him? She said, yeah, he was my boyfriend. We worked together at the restaurant. We would go for walks on the mountain during the break between lunch and dinner. And he was very nice. He was young. He was her age. He was young. So, 20, 21, 22. He lived with his uncle's family. He had just arrived from Italy. Just really vague stuff, but nothing specific, and nothing that really told me anything more about, how I can find him or them or the family. I asked her if she knew, when I was born, that I was his, and she didn't answer like yes or no. She said that my birth certificate father didn't know. I think she kind of alluded to the fact that she was suspicious because I was dark haired and dark eyed, and she is blonde and blue eyed. My birth certificate father had brown hair and brown eyes, when I knew him. But as a child, evidently, he was blonde. So I was darker than they were. But her father, my grandfather, had curly black hair. So, that was kind of, an explanation. And I don't know that she even thought about it beyond that. But she did surprise me. About a week later, early January, we were having lunch because she was getting ready to leave to go back to Florida. And at lunch, she said, well, I contacted somebody. She says, and she gave his name. And I asked him if it would be okay for you to call him and speak with him. And I was like shocked. I was floored. To me, I kind of thought, well, she lost contact with him, 50 odd years ago. I never expected that she had his phone number. So she gave me his phone number, and, she, like I said, she had called him, explained to him that I had I did a DNA test, found out this information, and could I call him? So she gave me his phone number, And then at the end of January of 2020, I called him. And I was like, a nervous wreck.
Mm-hmm.
I called him, and it was in the evening. I called him. He answered the phone. I said, this is my name. Do you know who I am? He said yes. And then I asked him if this was a good time to talk. And he said, no, not really. I said, well, can I give you my phone number? And I did. And it took like, I don't know, I repeated it multiple times. And he was just like, he was repeating it back to me, and, wasn't repeating it properly. I mean, it was like, and I'm thinking, oh, he's never going to call back. I mean, he's not going to call back. But it was fine because the phone number that she had given me matched the address that I had found in the phone book. So I had his address, and I thought, I'm going to write him a letter and send pictures, and, let's see what happens. Surprisingly, he did call me. He called me a few days later, left a message, and then I called him back, and we had a conversation, and just, I kind of, and he was like, during the whole conversation, I mean, it was a 20-minute conversation, and he told me a little bit about himself, and he said that he and my mother worked together and had a relationship, but she was married, and he was living at his, sleeping on his uncle's couch, and uh, etc. So he acted totally, at that time, acted totally shocked. Like he never thought. And I asked him, I said, did you ever see me when I was a baby? He said, yes, I saw you. He knew my father, my birth certificate father. But anyways, so he had seen me, but he didn't never he didn't think that I was his child. I guess at that time, it made it sound like the thought never crossed his mind. But anyway, so I had this conversation with him. He told me that he had moved to Montreal from Salerno, Italy, which is where those genes came from, in 1957. So that was in late January of 2020. And I asked him after we had that conversation. I said, "Do you mind if I send you a letter and some pictures?" And he said, "No, that would be nice. That would be fine." He told me about that he had 3 sons, 5 grandchildren, and of course his sons are younger than me. He married his wife that he's still married to. He married her a year after I was born, so in 1965. And she's Italian also. She's from Italy, and they have 3 sons and 5 grandchildren, and they all live very close together in that part of Montreal. I did send him a letter and pictures. So February of 2020, my birthday was in February. And on my birthday, I received an email from my birth father's wife, which, I had sent him a letter with telling him about me and with pictures and stuff in January. So in February, on my birthday, I received an email from her saying that he received my letter and happy birthday, and he was going to write me a letter. And she also, at the same time, friend requested me on Facebook. So, of course, I accepted. And that was, just a nice surprise. It was very nice.
Yeah.
So I received his letter. He's, told me about himself and how he had moved to Montreal in 1957, and he, told me where he was from in Italy, which was Salerno. And sent a picture of him and one of him and his wife together. So at that time, we kind of started communicating. I mean, we started, having phone conversations maybe every couple of weeks, and it's always just very short conversations. How's it going, etc. I had decided at that time that I really wanted to go meet them. So my plan was to go in April of 2020. And of course, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But so throughout 2020, we talked. I mean, once or twice a month we would talk, and I would ask him questions, and he always answered, the questions that I asked him. And I asked him if he had told his sons about me. And he was waiting. He said he wanted to tell them all together. And because of the restrictions and everything, they couldn't, gather together. So he did end up telling them in May of 2020. I guess they were together for Mother's Day, and he told them about me, that they had an older half sister. I guess they were okay. I mean, they didn't, from what he told me, there was no big reaction or whatnot. I mean, they were surprised, and they were teasing the oldest one that he wasn't the oldest one anymore. And I mean, it was all, it was not a big response. We continued on through 2020, communicating, talking. He sent me some pictures, quite a few pictures of him and his family, and it was real nice. So in last year in December, I asked him, I said, well, would it be okay if and I had never communicated with any of the brothers, and his wife, he always said, she says hello and stuff like that, but nothing, no other communications really. So I asked him last December, I said, would it be okay if I sent my half brothers a letter, introducing myself and kind of just letting them know about me? And he said, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So I did. I sent them each a card and a letter and a little gift, which I sent all of that to his house. I mean, I guess as soon as they got it, I got 3 responses, they all reached out to me right away. One of them, sent me a little friend requested me on Facebook and sent me a message thanking me. The other one sent me an email and said, it was that it was quite a shock, and his father was such a quiet man, and they never would have suspected, but they did say that because in the letter that I sent them, I said that their parents had been very gracious and kind, and it was a good situation. So and I appreciated that. And the brother that emailed me said that his parents had had spoken the same way about me, how I had been nice, to them. So the oldest brother sent me an email, which was a little more detailed. He did tell me about himself and his family, and his children and his wife. And he suggested that we do a Zoom call, which I was like, oh my gosh, So we did in February of 2021. We did a Zoom call with me and my family, my husband, my 2 sons, and my son's girlfriend, and my 3 half brothers and their families, and my birth father, and his wife. So it was nice. I mean, and before we did the Zoom call, I was a little nervous because they had sent me a picture via Messenger. His wife had sent me a picture of him and his 3 sons that had been taken that year. Like I guess it was on Mother's Day, and I looked at them and I was like, I don't, I asked my husband and my sons. I said, do I look like them? And one of my sons said, yeah, maybe you look like this one. Or, and I mean, there was no big resemblance. And they're all tall, good looking, middle-aged Italian men. And I'm short. I'm not very tall. So, I mean, I couldn't see it like in the facial features or anything like that. Nothing striking. So, I mean, before we did the Zoom call, I got a little nervous. I mean, I told my husband, I said, well, what if, what if I'm not really related to them? And he said, maybe you should bring up doing a DNA test. And I was like, yeah, I think I need to try to do that somehow, but I didn't know how that was going to come up. So we had the Zoom call, and it was really sweet, very nice. The oldest brother has children that are in their young 20s like mine. And they were there too, which I thought was nice. I mean, I thought it was nice that the whole family was included,
Mm-hmm.
no big secret or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was very nice. And during the conversation, I brought it up. I said, well, have any of you thought of doing a DNA test? Uh, and then the youngest brother said, no. He goes, no. He goes, no. He says, there's definitely some resemblances. And I said, oh, okay. He says, well, have you seen any pictures of my aunt? I said, no. He goes, well, you look like our aunt. I said, oh, okay. So, of course, nobody said that they would do a test, but a week later, my birth father, when he called me and he said, well, I got the box in the mail, and, they had ordered a DNA test. So he did go ahead and take that Ancestry DNA test and confirm that he was my father. So that was February 2021. In April of 2021, my husband and I went to Canada. We have a little cottage there. We had been vaccinated and everything, so and we're still Canadian citizens, even though we're American citizens also. But we were able to go over there because we had a property there. So we did go. We were there for a week. I met my birth father and his wife. They came to see us. They brought lunch, nice Italian lunch and homemade wine and espresso coffee and the whole thing. So we had a nice lunch together, and it was just so. I felt pretty powerful connection, I would say, to him. It was nice. It was a nice lunch. It wasn't like, there were no tears or big hugs there was, a little hug, but nothing, it was not dramatic. So we had a nice lunch, and I got a little more info from him. He did say that when I was born, there were two other ladies that worked at the restaurant with he and my mother. And the ladies told him after I was born, they said, "You need to go to the hospital. That's your baby. That baby looks just like you." And and I asked him. I said, "Well, did you go?" And he said, "No, I didn't. I didn't go." So that was that. I think there was more. He kind of acknowledged that I guess that had come up, that it was a
Yeah,
possibility.
that some people were mentioning it, and
Yeah,
so he
yeah,
considered it.
yeah. And when I spoke to my mother was here last summer, and I asked her. We haven't talked about it a lot, but I asked her, because she asked, did you meet him? And I said, yes, I met him. They brought us lunch. He's very nice. His wife is nice. And I said, well, he said, that I told her what he had told me about what the ladies that they worked with had said. She said, yeah. She said, well, when I was in the hospital, he did call, and he wanted to go see her, but she said, absolutely not, because she didn't want him to go to the hospital to visit her. So,
Just to
so
confirm, was your mom was
with
for sure with your father then?
my birth certificate
Your
father,
birth
yes,
yes, your birth certificate father.
she was
Mhm.
with him, yes. So that's why she didn't want.
Yep.
Yeah, she was. Yes, she was with him when I was born. He was there. Well, I don't. He was not there because in those days, they didn't have to be there. But he signed the paperwork, and I think she had to have a C-section, and he had to sign. So it was. Like I said, they were living as man and wife. They, uh, I think they were. She was Mrs. So and so. He signed the paperwork when I was born, and I was his baby. So yeah, so that was April 2021. We went back in July of 2021. My husband, my oldest son, and I, they invited us to their house for lunch. and to meet the half brothers. So we went, and it was so nice. I mean, we drove into this neighborhood, and which was it's an Italian neighborhood. There were a lot of Italian flags on the balconies because Italy had just won some sort of soccer match against England. I think it was a big deal. So they were all celebrating the people in that area. So we went to their house, and they had a big, big, big table in the backyard, and we sat outside for. I mean, it was like a 6-hour lunch, and everybody was there. I mean, the three brothers were there, their families were there. My family, except for one of my sons. I had one son there, one was not. So he got to meet his cousins, and it was nice. I mean, it was so. I was so appreciative. I mean, I just felt very appreciative of that. So we invited them to our place the next day, which was Sunday, and they all came, all of them, which I was like, wow. I mean, I was just like, this is so nice. I know that the family is very, very, very important to them. And I mean, they all live nearby. They all, I think they get together for a meal every weekend, every Saturday or Sunday. It's important to them. Plus, in July, things were not so, and of course, everybody was vaccinated. So we all felt safe. And it was before the Delta variant. So, I mean, we were pretty comfortable. We were outside. And I think they were happy too to get together with each other after not being able to do so
Yeah,
as much.
really.
So yeah, it was nice. We saw them, Saturday at their house, Sunday at our place, and then we left, and of course continued on throughout all this time, talking on the phone once or twice a week. Not once or twice a week, once or twice a month. My husband and I went back in September because we had to do some repairs on our place there. And it was our 30th anniversary, which I mentioned to them that we would be there, during our 30th anniversary. So they invited us, my brother and my half brother, they invited us to their place for lunch with the whole family again. And again, it was, super long lunch. And they had a cake for us. I mean, it was nice. It was just very, very nice. And that's it. I mean, that's kind of where we are now. I'm just very thankful that it worked out the way it did. I feel with him a bond.
Yeah.
I feel a bond with him for sure. With the brothers, it's like not really, but they're nice. Like they're all nice. Everybody's pretty reserved.
Mm.
So there's no drama. I mean, there's no, and they're nice guys. I mean, they're very nice guys. And of course, like since then we kind of send messages to each other once in a while, and, they're all into football. So, it's
Sounds
just,
like you've expanded your family and had some nice little additions to it.
yeah. Yeah. And, the thing for me that I've realized is that the timing is definitely the timing was good. For me, the timing was pretty good. I mean, my birth certificate father had been gone for almost 15 years. And then I get this father, which to me, when I think of them now, they're both my father. It's almost like when you have two kids, I mean, they're both your kids. So I can't really, I mean, I do think of my birth father as my father when I think of him, and I think of my birth certificate father as my father. And I'm so thankful that my birth father is healthy. He's healthy, he's 80, but very healthy and fit. And, you know, I mean, I'm really thankful for that. And my goal is to spend as much time with him as I can, in the coming years.
Isn't that nice?
Hmm. And the timing thing is important too, because definitely if I would have found this out when I was in my 30s, in my, it would have been, I mean, at my age when, your kids are raised and
Yeah.
you're kind of working out towards your retirement, the timing was good for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it really sounds like it. And also, especially how nice, once people were able to start to see each other again and
Yeah.
people were getting vaccinated, that here you get to meet your new members of your family.
Yeah.
Then and by the way, congratulations, happy belated 30 years. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks.
If people want to send anything to Julia, just go ahead and send it my way and I will forward it along to her. And the show's email is npestories@gmail.com. And we will just keep your privacy, Julia, and I will make sure and send anything along your way.
Okay.
But thank you for sharing your family union story with me today. I love to get NPE stories, and I really appreciated listening to you today.
Yes, and thank you, Lily, for doing this. It's really, I know you put in a lot of time on this, and I appreciate you doing that. Also, I love listening and re-listening to all of the stories that you share with us.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.